We plan and so we're all set to record. So good morning. I'm Mike O'Sullivan, CEO. I almost said co-CEO, CEO of One South Coast Chamber. And thank you for joining us today for the One South Coast Chamber's Yes for Mass Drivers event. We're excited to be doing this. We want to thank our sponsors, Flexibility and Benefits for Mass Drivers. So the app-based drivers are central to our economy. I think everybody kind of realizes that today. They're a lifeline for restaurants, they're a lifeline for small businesses, and they generate over $8.3 billion a year to the Massachusetts economy and over $500 million in tax revenue for local municipalities and the Commonwealth. So today's presentation will be given by Brendan Joyce from Lyft and Katie Franger from Uber, and we will leave an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please submit them through the chat. And depending on timing, I may do the Q&A. If I have to run, Ian, you can jump in and do the Q&A. So with that, we'll hand it over to Brendan and Kate and Jim Quigley from Pilgrim Strategies.
Thank you so much, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Brendan Joyce with Lyft. I manage Lyft's public policy in New England. So I also manage our great relationships with chambers such as the One South Coast Chamber. So thank you very much for hosting us today. The chamber has just been such a terrific supporter of this issue and a terrific advocate as well. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks, Mike. My name is Katie. I'm from Uber. I'm on our policy and public affairs team, and I cover kind of like all of New England, but Massachusetts has a special place in my heart. I apologize for my voice a little bit being creaky here, but thank you all for your time today. Jim, is there anything you wanted to say before I started sharing my screen?
Mike, I just wanted to thank you and Ian and the whole team over there for allowing us to come on. I apologize, my camera is off. I am actually in Las Vegas this morning, so I am in a hotel room. I know you guys all feel so bad for me, but
Did you sleep last night, Jim, or are you just been up since last night?
I've been partying all night, so I'm ready to go right now, and it should be good. Katie, I have, as a co-host, I have my screen ready to share right now, so I'm going to do that, and people can let me know if they are able to see.
Looks good.
All right.
There you go.
Thanks. So as mentioned, we formed a coalition a couple of years ago called Flexibility and Benefits for Massachusetts Drivers. And the coalition exists of thousands of drivers across the state of Massachusetts, as well as local community organizations, business groups, and 4 companies that represent the platforms that drivers and couriers connect to for different types of work. The coalition includes Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart. And many of our drivers, work across platforms. But if you want to go ahead to the next slide, as Brendan mentioned, we've been doing meetings across the state for several years now, and here's an overarching look at the different types of groups we've talked to and those that have supported our position, and what we've been explaining to them and what they've endorsed is our ballot proposal, which is we're currently out on in the field again, collecting more signatures before we submit them to the Secretary of State to be on the ballot this November. So as mentioned, a lot of local businesses and organizations utilize the different platforms for services, and we regularly survey businesses that use the platforms as well as drivers and consumers that use the platform. And it's shocking that the numbers that you see. Everyone has their own relationship with sorry, one second. everyone has a different relationship with the platform for themselves, but when you look at it in aggregate, it's actually quite surprising how much those in the state of Massachusetts utilize the platform. And so, you know, 144, over 144 million, consisting of 79 million rides and 64 million deliveries in last year alone. Obviously, we took a hit during the pandemic, as most companies and organizations did, but we've seen as things slowly shift back to the way we used to be, there's been an increase in needs for transportation and needs for food delivery. So a dramatic increase in just a few years in Massachusetts. Yeah, an increase of 70% in the total number of rides and deliveries just 2 years earlier. I mean, and as you know, during COVID, transportation needs and food delivery needs were still quite important, but everyone kind of felt the impact of a slower world. And we're increasing, we're getting back to how things used to be. And I think we've actually surpassed where we were pre-pandemic at this point in terms of the total number of users, rides, and deliveries. We also separate out rideshare and delivery. This is just kind of telling you how the increase has managed over the past couple of years. We have also not only are folks taking more trips and getting more deliveries, but more local restaurants are joining the platforms too, as they see the need to have increased visibility and an increased population and community looking at the restaurant. So new merchants have jumped on the platforms in recent years too, showing us that it wasn't just like a moment in time. We continue to offer opportunities on both sides of the business.
Trying to move the slide. There we go.
That's okay. So as I said, we do pretty frequent surveys of our drivers and couriers, and we also submit our annual reports and regular numbers to DPU. The DPU is a regulator in Massachusetts, and they help kind of track all of the usage and the miles done and the number of drivers and couriers are utilizing the platform. Just looking at the past couple of years, when we assess the time that a driver is working on the platform, we have found that the average amount of earnings per hour is over $25, so far beyond minimum wage in Massachusetts. And we also have found that the average driver is actually not on the platform at a full-time amount. And so I think, Brendan, do you have a better understanding of the research that we did on the earnings per hour?
Yes, yeah. So this is from the last campaign and still pretty relevant today, obviously. As Katie described, you know, the 4 platforms involved here, Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, and Instacart, are a ubiquitous part of the Massachusetts economy for both riders, for consumers, but of course also for drivers. And so this study looked at aggregated anonymized data from all 4 platforms and used some very well-researched assumptions to determine that drivers, on average, across the 4 platforms make over $26 an hour. There are other studies out there that don't use raw data from the companies, that don't use very solid assumptions the way we did on expenses. So you may hear other numbers out there that are lower. This is, a more accurate picture of what drivers who do this type of work earn. And of course, the $8.3 billion of economic activity in Massachusetts both reflects those driver earnings, but also, delivery connecting consumers to restaurants and to, grocery stores, and also riders to essential businesses and locations as well. And so I think the picture that's painted here, and we have volumes of other data we can point to as well, rideshare and delivery play a very important role in the Massachusetts economy.
So this speaks to what I alluded to previously. Again, we look at the drivers' activity on the platforms, and the majority of drivers are actually only driving a very short, like five hours a week or less. 82%, 15 hours a week or less. And we see this as we talk to drivers. What we've learned is that that's because they view this work as supplemental income. It's because they have another job. It's because they actually are, the head of the family, and they're taking care of young kids, or they're taking care of elderly parents, or they themselves have health issues that they need to attend to. It involves lots of commuting or doctors. And so this is a supplemental gig that they do during times that they're not busy with their other responsibilities. And so that's generally the majority of the majority of data that we get back from drivers anecdotally, that they do this because they can hop on and off the platforms when it makes sense for them, based on whatever other unique circumstances they have.
I would just add, Katie, there are a small percentage of drivers who do work sort of the 40-hour plus work week, often working with multiple platforms. For example, drivers who drive with Lyft report that I think it's over 70% that they do multi-app. And that's really premised on the independent contractor status that's sort of at debate here. As an independent contractor, you're able to have Lyft and Uber open at the same time and kind of pick and choose which ride you'd like to take. Obviously, no offense, Katie, we'd love for drivers to choose Lyft at that time. But obviously, relative to an employee or an employment system, it's a very different approach. And even those more full-time drivers, it's about 1.7, 1.8 when you look at the 200,000 or so platform-based drivers across the economy in Massachusetts, do drive that sort of 40-plus hour work week. Even when you talk to them, though, they often are folks who left full-time jobs, who really value the flexibility of being able to pick up their kids from school when they need to without having to check with a supervisor or move their schedule. Being able to take care of an elderly parent, or often they're working another job that is a more traditional employment role where they do have a set schedule, and they wouldn't be able to do this work in addition to that, based on on how flexible it is. This is some data. Oh, sorry, Katie, jump in.
No, I just wanted to elaborate even more on Brendan's point. We've heard stories from drivers that they've actually lost jobs, and then in struggling to find a new job that worked for their unique schedule, or being able to juggle multiple things in the air, including kids' schedules and other family obligations, that they started doing the gig work part-time as they looked for other work, and then found that it actually was so lucrative and beneficial to make their own schedule that they stopped looking for other jobs, because they found that this work was not only rewarding, but just more convenient, and enabled them to live, create the life that they wanted, more on their own terms. We hear stories like that all the time. We also hear just stories that people aren't necessarily, they're not doing it full time because they're retired and they just kind of like want to get out of the house every now and then. The stories kind of run the gamut of who interacts with this platform, and it's all different sides of life that people are interacting and choosing to work on these platforms.
Yeah, and there's a lot of data out there. As I mentioned earlier, that slide reflects probably the most comprehensive survey that's done, has been done in our space. It's a survey from Pew Research back in 2021 that looked at, I think it was over a 10,000 person survey that looked at, how drivers approach gig work and why they do gig work, it is very consistent with the research that the campaign has done and that each of the companies have done in this space.
What's interesting about what Brendan is kind of diving into on the multi-apping is that if we were to try to make an example out of this in a more traditional work setting. So let's say you work at Dunkin' Donuts and you show up. There's no example of being able to show up to Dunkin' Donuts whenever you want. Like you have a shift, you have to be there at a specific time, and you have to be there for a specific amount of time. And every single person that comes in, whatever they order, you have to make that drink. Someone can't come in and order a fancy Frappuccino and say, I don't want to make that drink. I'm going to run across the street to Starbucks and just pour a bunch of black coffees and then I'll come back when the rush is over. The unique thing about this platform work is that drivers and couriers can choose to accept the trips and the orders that they find that work best for them. And that type of model doesn't work in any other traditional setting of work.
Yeah, this type of minute by minute flexibility is truly unique. We've looked, there's really no other example in either the Massachusetts economy or across the country of this type of work and how easily accessible it is for folks, which is why it's so popular.
That said, we recognize that there's still an opportunity to create a new model, especially in Massachusetts. And we've been talking to drivers across the state for years, asking them what would make this type of work better for them. What type of scenario would enable this type of work to improve their lives and improve the working conditions. And what we've heard from them is that generally the earnings are good and the flexibility is what they value the most, the independence to be driving and delivering where they want to be, what the time they want to be and for how long. But we do hear that still a majority of them would be interested in additional benefits, and they like the idea of kind of a floor. And what we mean by floor is just that it's not setting an earning standard. It's creating a minimum so that, if there's a bad day on the job, right? Like it's sunny and beautiful in Boston and everyone wants to walk around and go to restaurants instead of trying to get a car or delivering at home after a busy day. What we do is we would set a floor so that there would be never a situation where you would be earning less than $18 an hour. And $18, we got to $18 an hour because that's 120% of the minimum wage. And so the way that we've created a ballot proposal, the 120% of the minimum wage would also increase, obviously, when the minimum wage increases in the state. The other benefits that we've included in our proposal include a stipend for healthcare, paid sick days, insurance for on-the-job injuries. And these are the things that we're hearing drivers say would improve the working conditions for them, as long as they get to stay independent and maintain their own schedule. That's first and foremost. These benefits don't really mean anything to them if they don't have that flexibility protected. And so sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, sorry, Katie. The only thing I would add just briefly is that, most of these benefits really are more structured for the 1.7, 1.8% of drivers who drive that sort of 40-hour work week and maybe don't have a day job. Most drivers, the vast majority of drivers on the Lyft platform do have a day job where they get employee benefits or they get their health care, for example, through a spouse's day job. But for those drivers who, are driving, sort of the traditional 40-hour plus work week across the platforms, we do want to ensure all four companies involved that there are benefits and a safety net in place for those drivers particularly.
So that kind of rounds out what our ballot proposal encompasses. It encompasses first and foremost, the protection of their flexibility and independence as independent contractors, to be able to work when, where, and for how long they want, and then also adds these new benefits these new benefits, as Brendan mentioned, that would mainly apply to those who are spending a lot of time across the platforms. And so again, we've talked to thousands of drivers across the state. They've joined our coalition, and we're educating drivers, voters, community groups about the ballot now, because we know it's confusing. We know there's lots of ads, there's lots of headlines kind of contradict or combat each other. We don't see this actually as that controversial, because all it is supporting drivers in what they want and enhancing their experience while working on these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate how wildly popular this sort of independent contracting plus benefits model is with drivers. Our polling consistently finds, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country, 80, 90% or more of drivers support this approach. I've worked on a lot of different campaigns. I know Jim and Katie have as well. It's hard to see that level of support. I'm not sure if ice cream on a hot day is as popular as this concept is with drivers. And I think you will see as the campaign continues, and you maybe have seen already, drivers will really be at the forefront of everything the campaign is doing in terms of our ads, events with elected officials and other stakeholders. Drivers support this, and it's very important that folks realize that it's wildly popular with drivers across all 4 platforms and across the country.
Definitely, and it's important for us to highlight the different stories, because drivers, as we were talking about before, really interact with the platform in so many different ways. It impacts lives in so many different ways, from the college kid to the retired person to the other one managing multiple jobs. There's so many various ways that these platforms have kind of ingratiated themselves into the world, especially into the economy of Massachusetts. And we're trying to do something new here, and so know that it can be confusing, and want to open the floor for any questions anyone might have.
Yeah, there are multiple fronts to this discussion. There's a legislative component. There's obviously a lawsuit, which we can't talk too much about, but happy to answer any questions.
So, Brendan and Katie, who's fueling the actual push for the ballot initiative?
Our ballot initiative, the companies are, and as well as drivers. So the coalition is made up of Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, and Instacart. But we have thousands of drivers who have signed up as coalition members as well. And they're the ones who we feature most prominently in our ads, who write op-eds that show up in your local papers, and who get interviewed by reporters and other stakeholders. And we'd be happy to bring drivers to meet with folks as well.
Yeah, and I would just add that the 4 companies involved here are pursuing this type of model really everywhere where we can, where there's an opportunity to do so. The conversation's a little bit more urgent in Massachusetts because of the lawsuit that I mentioned. Tricky for us to talk about that right now, given it is happening right now. But it does add sort of certainly a sense of urgency on our part and for drivers to get something done here that protects their independent contractor status while granting new benefits as well.
Okay. Mark Kinney raised his hand.
Yeah, hi, thank you, and great presentation, Katie and Brendan. I see things a little differently, and I'll get into some of those bullet points. But I am an Uber and Lyft customer, and I use both the services regularly, for short rides, or if I've been out and I've had a couple of drinks and I'm not going to take a chance driving, even if it's a short distance and it's like a $10 ride. I mean, there's such a value just in that. So I'm not anti Uber and Lyft. I own a limousine chauffeur company, so we do a lot of the same things. It's a little different. We don't do $10 rides because we wouldn't be in business too long. But we're forced in Massachusetts to be an employee-based model. And that means paying payroll taxes, FICA. We just got a massive workman's comp bill. all types of insurance coverages, health insurance, some of these things are optional. We pay dental, 401k to retain good talent. And if we'd love to be an IO model, we have an app we deploy our jobs through an app. So that's kind of the conundrum for us. Like, we're not saying Uber and Lyft are bad inherently, but why can't it be applicable to all other businesses? Because we basically do the exact same thing. And what's interesting, without getting too in the weeds, is Uber and Lyft and Amazon have changed customer behavior. So when I started the business, we would get reservations 2 weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance from corporate customers, regular customers. Now we get, hey, I need to make a reservation. When do you need it for? Oh, we need it in 20 minutes. So it's created a whole nother conundrum from a staffing perspective. So if we had a model like this that we could align with, our industry would be totally supportive of it, and we would eliminate all those costs I just mentioned.
Yeah, Mark, I totally get where you're coming from and sort of the differences and the similarities between the two industries we're talking about. I think the main thing I would say is that, this type of work, this platform-based work, is unique. It really is. There's, like I said, 70 or 80%, if not more, of drivers on these platforms, multi-app, meaning they'll have Lyft and Uber open at the same time. If they want to go do delivery with Uber Eats or with DoorDash or Instacart, they're able to do that. They can turn the app off. They can do one ride or two rides and then disappear for 6 months and come back. And so I think, given that, we are advocating for, a new model that is unique in the way that our industry is unique, and that sort of meets, the needs of and wants of drivers. I think the biggest and sort of most important thing I would say, though, is that drivers, again, overwhelmingly support the independent contractor model that we're talking about here. Lyft does an annual economic impact report where we essentially survey drivers and riders on our platform. 65% of drivers on the Lyft platform in Massachusetts tell us that they would no longer drive as employees. And so, it's about 200,000 or so open employment roles in Massachusetts right now, based on the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If drivers wanted to be employees, there's plenty of opportunities to go and find those jobs. But this is what fits best for them. And, I think I would, the only other thing I would say, and Katie should jump into, is that, we fully recognize that the kind of independent contracting plus benefits model isn't the perfect solution or perfect approach for every industry out there. We think for drivers in this space it is, and given the kind of push on the other side, the alternative, drivers quitting in huge numbers if they're forced into an employment model they don't want to participate in, is quite concerning for us. And what the precedent that would set, frankly, for the broader business community as well.
Yeah, the only
I don't think we're that different though, Brendan. Because you could have Katie's limo and she does a ride for me, and then she does a ride for Brendan's limo, and she does a ride for Hunter's limo. I mean, this is common. This is like a model they use in New York in black car service. So why aren't we included? So, I mean, you'd probably have a whole industry that would support it if there was some inclusivity.
I think another difference is that rides are not guaranteed on the platforms or deliveries. So if you are out on Friday night, you have drinks, you open the platform and you try to get a ride, and there's no drivers out there, you can't use the platform.
That
And
happened
so
once out of 1,000 rides, probably.
sure, but when you call a service like your service, that someone is there someone is on at a shift and they're available, or they will be available because they've called in advance. And so that shift kind of provides a different level of certainty than the platforms do.
All right, I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree. I don't want to take any more oxygen in the room, but yeah, I'm not agreeable with the position. I mean, you're creating a whole new category. You shouldn't have to pay benefits if they're a true independent contractor. If I hired you as an independent contractor to paint my house, I'm not going to pay you, insurance or, a guaranteed minimum wage.
Yeah, Mark, totally understand. And we appreciate your questions and your concerns. Believe me, we understand it's a complicated issue with many different perspectives. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah.
Brendan, one other thing I've heard recently is the Teamsters seem to have joined the battle against this. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah,
Well-
I don't want to get too into the labor weeds, Mike, particularly with this being recorded, frankly. But I can kind of give you a high level sort of answer, I think. So, the push here is really around the ABC test. That's what the lawsuit is sort of looking to apply to the rideshare industry. It's a test that basically, um, you know, uh, Massachusetts law around sort of should workers be employees or independent contractors. As you might know, that was put into place by the building trades about 20 years ago. Guy named Frank Callahan, who's the head of the Massachusetts Building Trades, is very proud of that law and does not, for many reasons, want to see any industry sort of not included in that framework. And so Frank has a good relationship with Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters. I think that's where they're coming from. I think the most important sort of takeaway, however, is that the labor is divided on this. SEIU is another big labor union out there that has a different approach. We don't necessarily love their approach, but they are talking to drivers and seem to understand, as much as they won't fully maybe say this publicly, that drivers don't want to be employees, and their bill in the state house and the ballot question sort of reflects that reality.
Yeah, let me back out. Let me
whereas
back out just a little
Yeah,
bit from what
yeah.
Brendan is saying. So, there are actually a lot of proposals on the table to address this issue. The companies have submitted various types of proposals, and different labor groups have submitted types of proposals. And we have been adamant and loud about wanting to come together with labor and talk to them about negotiating a compromise or a package that we know that the drivers would benefit from and that they would actually want, right? Because the most important thing for us is identifying a solution that keeps drivers on the road so that these requests can be fulfilled and we create the supply and demand needed for the industry to continue operating in Massachusetts. And one of the proposals that we've seen from labor, we've taken back to drivers and asked them for their opinion on it. And unfortunately, it's similar to what Brendan alluded to before. Drivers would just not continue to take trips and to work on platforms if they were successful in pursuing one of these proposals that would make them employees. It would create base locations, which means that drivers would only be able to accept certain trips if they were located in a certain space. And that means like when they would accept a trip, they would start and end and then have to go back to that base in order to accept another trip. And drivers do not want that type of work. It also creates more municipal paperwork. It would create licensure in every single municipality. And drivers have enough, they're doing this work because they can hop on and off and it's actually a very, very low barrier entry to work. And that's also one of the benefits. Creating a licensure structure the way that labor has proposed would massively increase the burden of trying to get online and accept trips. You would have to have basically a license in every single city and every township in order to take trips there or make deliveries there. And drivers have just told us that these types of facets to the proposal would make it unseemly and no longer appealing work. So again, we've talked to thousands of drivers across the state to gather what is it that would make the work more appealing to them, what would keep them on the road and driving, accepting trips and making deliveries. And that's how we built our proposal. Again, we would love to come to the table, whether it be to create a legislative package or any other type of solution. We would love to come to the table and talk to stakeholders in labor, as well as long as drivers are also at the table to make sure that this works for them. But to date, we've not been able to convene that table because we haven't necessarily had willing partners on the labor side.
Yeah, absolutely. The one, the bill that Katie's referencing is the AFL-CIO's bill. One important thing I think for the South Coast in that bill that would have a very deleterious impact on rideshare availability. The bill also sets up, in addition to all these other sort of onerous requirements, this base location sort of concept where essentially, you as a driver, the bill also makes drivers employees. You'd have to report to to cite another great old sitcom like here in Cheers, a taxi dispatch sort of location. They'd have to go there, accept any rides, any ride that they want to accept or are being told to accept as employees. They'd have to do it from that base location. So, say for example, you're a driver who's doing the very frequent sort of Logan to Fall River or New Bedford sort of route. Well, the way it works now is independent contractors, they kind of follow the demand, right? And so that driver may end up in Fall River or New Bedford for a few hours doing rides local to your communities before they head back to Boston, or maybe they have a ride that pulls them out to Worcester. Under this model, that driver would have to drive all the way back to their base location in Boston before they can accept another ride. The way it works now, it really sort of spreads the supply of drivers regionally across the state based on where demand is. Under this bill proposed by Senator Lydia Edwards, it would have a terrible impact on the availability of this service in cities like Fall River and New Bedford. And that's a very important component of that bill amongst major problems we have with it that we're pushing back on.
Thanks, Brendan. Ian, go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. I was hoping to describe an experience I had recently, which touches on a few of the different models we've talked about today. I'm in New Bedford. To go to Logan, this happened. To go to Logan, I have to, Uber and Lyft is available in the evenings around, going out time. It's great to use them. To go to Logan, especially in off hours, you can't get an Uber or a Lyft. So I book a limo service, and it's great. They're reliable. They show up when I need to. I get to the airport. I fly. I land at my destination. I take a taxi service because there's a line of taxis there, right? I drive to my destination. The experience, okay, they drive a little erratic. They're not necessarily as friendly. When I want to go back to the airport, I take an Uber or Lyft because I'm at a hotel. There's no line of taxis there. I take an Uber or Lyft back. It's a good experience. I fly back and I take an Uber or Lyft back, or a limo service back to my home because a lot of the Uber or Lyft drivers at Logan don't want to drive an hour and a half back to New Bedford. I describe that because with the question being with the not with the limos, right? That's just a convenience kind of thing. That's my experience down here in New Bedford. But the taxi service really from the airport to the hotel and the Lyft and Uber service back to the airport, it seems there are two different experiences I've found recently. One seems to be a little more, they drive a little more aggressively, they're less friendly, versus Uber or Lyft, who seems to be their success is based off reviews, it seems. And I don't know if this is, I haven't really heard much talk about this, but is there a concern that being full-time protected traditional employees could service for riders potentially be impacted? Does that make sense?
It does,
Yeah,
Katie, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, it does make sense, but again, the driver, what we hear from drivers is that this is their gig is their own. They approach it as if it's their own job, right? Like it's their business, and so that's why you'll see different drivers provide, having different provisions in their car, right? Like sometimes you get in an Uber or a Lyft, and there's like bottles of water, or sometimes there's chargers. Sometimes they ask you what kind of music you want to listen to. Every driver has a different approach because they create their own kind of entrepreneurial experience for how they want to interact both with the consumer and the platform. And so that will really never change because it's the gist of this whole market. And they're not necessarily, drivers are not necessarily like, yes, they do, there is a rating check, and that's just to make sure that the drivers that are utilizing the platform for trip requests are practicing good safety standards and using best practices that we've found over the years that that make the experience pleasurable or pleasant for consumers. But really, they all have their own different approach because it's their own business in every single situation. So we don't see that changing because they will still have the opportunity by protecting independence and flexibility. They get to choose when and where and for how long and how exactly they want to show up in this work.
Yeah,
so
and I just such a good explanation of that, Katie. You know, I was at Logan yesterday. Actually, we lifted a big driver appreciation event in the Logan staging lot. I probably talked to like 500 drivers over the course of the day, and there's drivers who, you know, have their 10-year-old Toyota Camry and they're just doing this part-time to make a little extra money to pay their bills or save up for a wedding. And then there was a driver I spoke to who just spent, you know, $70,000 on a maxed out sort of top of the line Suburban. He has a livery business, and so he's doing livery rides. And then if he wants to jump over to Lyft or Uber, he does that. You know, we can't get into, so Lyft and Uber, as you know, are competitors, and so there's a lot of legal reasons we can't talk about sort of you know, what either business would do under any type of scenario, as you asked. I would just point you back to what I mentioned earlier, that you know, we've asked drivers would they Lyft has you know, would you continue driving if you lost your independence, and 65% have said no. And so, you know, I think you can assume what that would mean for the service. It wouldn't be good.
No, I think it makes
Hopefully
sense.
that answers your question.
I guess my concern is if we were to change the model, like some are proposing, away from being independent contractors, the service might drop a little because, you know, they don't. When I get an Uber, it seems like they want to provide the top level service right now because their rating depends on it. You know, and if they weren't independent contractors, maybe that service drops a little bit. I don't know. It's just potentially a theory. If they were, you know, protected employees and they weren't independent contractors, is a little bit of my.
It's that, but it's mostly that drivers wouldn't even sign on. They wouldn't open the platform. They wouldn't, as Brendan said, that like Lyft has done their own research on this, and the vast majority of drivers just would not do the work anymore. It's not even about necessarily a service change. It's just about availability.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Supply would dry up at that point, right?
Right.
So how is this different from AB5? Is there anything from a textbook approach from what you guys did in California?
That's a great question, Mark. You're following this closely. Yeah, it's very similar, frankly, with how things have played out in California. As you probably know, AB5 that Mark referenced is a bill that was put into place in California. And Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 2019, maybe 2018, that basically implemented an ABC test in that state as well. It was so broad that the legislature carved out several hundred industries from the ABC test, of course, except for TNCs and DNCs. And so very similar to what we're doing here in Massachusetts. You know, the four companies put together a coalition, ran a ballot question campaign called Prop 22, which our ballot question is very closely modeled after, with some slight differences. And that won overwhelmingly in November of 2020, won just about every single demographic of voters, won about 60-40, won pretty much every part of the state. Ideological differences, race, socioeconomic sort of demographics, it won big time with basically every sort of stripe of voter. And that's because drivers were at the forefront, as they will be in this campaign, of all the ads, of sort of all the outreach to voters, really beating the drum that not only do drivers support this, they desperately want it. And Prop 22 since has been, you know, to note, certainly not to our surprise, wildly popular with drivers. And in a recent poll done of California drivers, they've said that, you know, they support Prop 22. It's working well for them. They've noticed a positive difference, and they would like to see it expanded to other states as well.
Now, is that still being relitigated now? I've kind of have lost touch of it, but isn't it held up in a appeals court or something at this point?
It is not held up. It's still the law of the land in California. There is a challenge in the California Supreme Court. There will be some oral arguments on that end of this month, and potentially a ruling, you know, this summer or fall. We feel confident that we will win that case.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to pass because customers want $10 rides, so they're going to vote for it. I mean, because think of what's the cost of a ride would be that I described. That ride will now be $60 or $70. So they're gonna the public is gonna vote for it because they want $10 rides. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it's a ubiquitous service. Folks enjoy the service, and drivers enjoy providing the service. They are sort of their own business and their own transportation provider, and there's a reason they choose to do this type of work. It's because of the flexibility, overwhelmingly.
Well, Brendan and Katie, thank you so much for the presentation. We really appreciate it. It looks like we don't have any more questions.
Is that gonna be emailed out? Can I get a copy of the PDF or the presentation?
Sure, we can share that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep. Totally.
So thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you again, Brendan and Katie and Jim. We greatly appreciate your, you're doing this. Obviously it's an important topic, and so thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for your
Thank you.
time
Thank you, Mike.
again. And if other questions pop up, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Take care.